Furina just received pretty significant changes, significant enough to make a decent chunk of my past videos useless now. Great. She received the kind of changes you can't just tell right away if they're bad or not, and that's why I'm here. If I had to think of a keyword to define these changes, that would probably be stack generation, because the mechanics behind their burst got a complete overhaul. First and foremost, the burst energy cost got decreased from 70 to 60, and so did the cooldown from 18 to 15. Second, the maximum amount of stacks that can be generated through the burst got decreased from 450 to 300. At a glance, it might seem that her supportive capabilities received a huge nerf in favor of her energy requirements now being easier to accommodate, but there is more going on here. But before I delve deeper into that, let me just state the obvious here. Since her energy requirements are lower, her damage increases. Roughly, on average, a burst cost decrease of 10 is around a 20% smaller energy recharge requirement for her across the board, which in turn, it amounts to roughly 4 energy recharge substats you have to invest on her, which means potentially 4 more offensive substats. In the best case scenario, which is if all 4 of these substats roll into crit, it's a 10% damage increase to her elemental skill damage. In worst case scenarios, so if some of these substats roll into HP percent, it's still pretty great, so it's a pretty nice buff overall. But what if I told you that even excluding this personal damage increase, she got a pretty decisive buff in the form of stacks generation? Let me remind you all that if you enjoy my works and my theory crafting, you can show your support by subscribing and leaving a thumbs up, and also following me on Twitter. You see, the first thing they did to counterbalance the fact you now can generate less stacks potentially at maximum is increasing the damage bonuses you get for each stack. As a result, while the damage bonus ceiling decreased with this change, the amount of damage bonus you get by reaching 300 stacks is now comparatively much higher compared to the first version of Furina's burst. To reach a similar level of damage bonus, you previously needed to reach 360 stacks with Furina's burst, which wasn't the easiest thing actually. In one of my previous analyses, I concluded that on average, if you had a healer on team, you would be able to reach around 280 stacks by the end of the rotation with Furina's burst. This kind of estimation was simply based on the amount of HP Furina's elemental skill would drain from all teammates, and the amount you would heal back with a team-wide healer. Of course, this amount could easily go higher if you receive damage from opponents, which is very realistic, and if you played characters from Fontaine that have HP draining mechanics. So, as a baseline by itself, it seems that this change elevated the floor of damage bonus you can receive, while it decreased the ceiling you can reach. But there is more, and this next change will actually change everything. What basically happened is that the HP drain from the elemental skill got increased by a significant amount, and this just increases the stacks you'll generate from the elemental burst. If you look at it from the perspective of how much the HP drain increased for each pet, it might not seem like much, but if you see it from a rotation-wide perspective, then it looks much better. By the time 10 seconds have passed since Furina uses her elemental skill, the situation will pretty much look like this. I've arbitrarily picked 10 seconds because it seems to me that most teams' damage is still active at that point of the rotation, so it seems like a good arbitrary number to pick. So, by that point, from Furina's HP drain alone, the team will have an 8% higher damage bonus compared to the first version of Furina's burst. This gets even better if you take into account you will bring a healer on team, which will duplicate the amount of stacks you have reached at a certain point if you use a team-wide heal. Of course, this is a pretty vague estimation, because predicting the exact amount of stacks you will have at a specific point in a rotation in any situation is pretty much impossible, but with a healer, this is how it should look like on average. So, as you can see, basically the combined effect of having higher HP drain from Furina's elemental skill and the higher damage bonus per stack her burst now generates will allow you to get much more damage bonus much faster in the rotation. So, even though the damage bonus ceiling naturally got lower, now you can front load more damage bonus, which is more useful for basically anything to me. It's probably even more useful if you're looking at it in a sense of clear speed potential, which is what's important in the Abyss most of the time. Faster and higher damage bonus generation from Furina means higher front load damage from the team, which generally is the key to faster clear times in the Abyss. So what I'm trying to say here is that everybody wins and everybody is happy. And this is on top of a kit I pretty much already considered overpowered in its first version. So she got buffed, which is crazy, but we'll take it. The craziness doesn't end here, not even close. The second big change she received is that her Constellation 2 got swapped with her Constellation 6, just like that. If you remember the previous video I made on the Constellation 2, I was not so high on it. It was nice since it allowed her to frontload more damage from the team potentially and generate more stacks, but it was just hard to collocate it within most teams' rotations. On the flip side, the new Constellation 2 is just straight up broken. The new Constellation 2 doubles the amount of stacks you'll generate through HP changes for the team, and also gives Furina HP percent bonuses based on how much surplus stacks you have. Basically, any single stack you'll get over the maximum possible of 300 will be converted into HP percent bonuses for Furina, which will increase her personal damage output. Just as a baseline, this wording kind of implies it will be easy to overcap stacks for Furina, which by itself is pretty fucking good. Let's pick the same scenario I used before again. So the scenario where you get a certain amount of stacks by midway through the rotation and calculate the damage bonus. With a team-wide healer on team and with a Constellation 2 active, by the time 10 seconds have passed since elemental skill cast, she will already overcap on stacks. So by this point, any more stacks generated will translate into personal damage increases for Furina, which in my opinion is the least important part of the Constellation. From my point of view, this already pretty broken sounding Constellation can look even better if you look at it from the perspective that it will allow you to front load stacks even more. Potentially, it allows your team to reach the maximum amount of damage bonus by the time 7 seconds have passed in the rotation, which is amazing since that's the time when the main DPS generally enters on the field. So the part that ensures your main DPS will have the full buff for its entire window is much more enticing than the potential damage increase Furina will get through HP bonuses. And anyway, in either case, it's so broken that it's hard to quantify honestly. If you want my honest take on it, Furina already looked like a top 3 character in the game before the buff, and with this, she just looks unbalanced and potentially the best character in the game. To me, it just seems that miHoYo wants her to completely own the competition within the element. So when it's all said and done, Yiran and Shincho could end up being straight up inferior compared to the Archon. And now I'm really happy I haven't done any dedicated team analysis video for Furina yet. Furina new let video tomorrow. Stay tuned.